Great, I'm Freeman Rabowski. I'm delighted to welcome you here. We have students and faculty and guests from off campus. I'm delighted to introduce the Deputy Secretary, Sarah Bloom Raskin. She's a Marylander. I'm very proud to say that. I was at the Department of Labor Licensing and Regulation this morning and said she was coming, and they were immediately telling me that they claimed her since she was with them for a while. Prior to her confirmation as Deputy Secretary, which occurred, by the way, with the Senate hearing on March 12th of this year, Ms. Rankin served as a governor of the Federal Reserve Board, where she helped conduct the nation's monetary policy, regulate banking institutions, and implement Wall Street reform. She was confirmed again by the U.S. Senate to that position on September 30th, 2010. Before joining the Federal Reserve Board, she held a number of positions, including serving as the Commissioner of Financial Regulation for the state of Maryland from 2007 to 2010. She's a graduate of both Amherst College and Harvard Law School. We just had a delightful time with students, and what was most impressive was she was very interested in listening to their perspectives. And so please join me in welcoming Secretary Raskin. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Freeman, for that lovely introduction. And I have to say that I'm really pleased to be here at UMBC today. I want to thank the students, too, for joining us. I did just have the privilege of being part of a roundtable discussion with different students, and I have to say I was just absolutely blown away by the thoughtfulness and insight that the students here are bringing to their educational experience. What I want to use more of my time here today to talk to you about is a complicated but important issue, and that is student loans. This is a multifaceted topic, and so I'm not going to discuss today all of the different dimensions to it. But before I start, I do want to say that I am really particularly excited about this wonderful place. UMBC, under the leadership of President Rabowski, is doing terrific, innovative work. Okay? Yeah, no problem. The Meyerhoff Scholars Program is just one example. Because of this program, participation of underrepresented minorities in biomedical PhD programs here has increased dramatically. And this is really just one example of President Rabowski's and UMBC's stellar achievements. Among others are the President's work as chair of the National Academies Committee, his work on President Obama's Advisory Commission on Educational Excellence for African Americans, his insightful writings, and his numerous honorary degrees. Of course, as a fellow Marylander, I would be remiss if I didn't mention his Marylander of the Year award, not to mention UMBC's standing as the nation's #1 up-and-coming university for the past 5 years, and its ranking among the nation's leading institutions for best undergraduate teaching. This is truly impressive. U.S. News and World Report may say you're up and coming, but seems to me, given what I know about the place, I think you've already arrived. I should also say something about your chess team. Now, your chess team is world famous. My husband, who's a Maryland state senator and captain of the Senate's chess team, told me that he lasted about 6 minutes playing the 21-year-old captain of your team, who beat him while playing 2 other senators at the same time. President Rabowski, you and your students are an inspiration to us all. I'm very excited at the chance to be with you here today.
Thank you.
So here's what I'm going to talk about. First, I'm going to describe why completing higher education matters to the economy. Second, I'm going to describe the growth of student loan debt and ask some questions about how to evaluate the extent to which the levels of student loan debt are problematic. Well, as we all know, there are many benefits to higher education that we could discuss in infinite detail. Better health, higher civic engagement, and intellectual growth. But the benefit that I want to emphasize today is the benefit to our country's economic growth and prosperity. The strength of our economy depends on its ability to harness the creative and productive potential of graduating students. People with skills, judgment, fortitude, and insight enhance our economy's ability to achieve momentum and vitality. Our economy cannot and will not grow to its full potential without you and your contributions. The United States enjoys one of the highest GDPs per capita in the world, and this is due in large part to the high productivity of American workers. More educated workers are not only more efficient, but also develop innovations that make all workers more productive. We should therefore aim to create policies that make education accessible for all, because expanded education is key to enhancing the vitality of the economy and our global competitiveness. The evidence speaks clearly to the high payoff individuals receive from a completed college education. Graduation from a 4-year higher education institution means lifetime earnings by hundreds of thousands of dollars, and college grads are the only educational group that has enjoyed real wage gains over the last several decades. In 2013, those with at least a college degree were approximately half as likely to be unemployed as those only with a high school diploma. Recent work from the Pew Foundation underscores the key role that education plays in promoting mobility. Pew found that without a 4-year college degree, children born in the bottom income quintile have a 45% chance of remaining there as adults. With a degree, they have an 80% chance of being in a higher income quintile than their parents. Education is a major path to upward mobility. At the same time that the data points to enhanced economic outcomes for students with 4-year degrees, we're confronted with the stark reality that middle and lower income families are less able to afford the cost of a degree. College affordability is a pressing concern because tuition increases at colleges and universities across the nation have been quite dramatic. Though increased grants and scholarships mean that net tuition might rise less than the full tuition price, at a public 4-year school, net tuition is still, on average, 50% higher today in real terms than it was in 1994. At for-profit schools, tuition is often higher than at public universities, and completion rates are lower. Furthermore, the challenges associated with paying for higher education have been exacerbated in recent years by our slow recovery from the worst recession since the Great Depression. Home prices have made only a partial recovery from their lows. Long-term unemployment is still more than twice as high as its historical norm, and tightened credit markets make it more difficult to access some types of credit financing. Many middle-class families simply do not have the financial resources they did prior to the financial crisis. These considerations have driven the administration's efforts both to help students and families pay for college and to rein in the cost increases we've seen in recent decades. The maximum Pell Grant award has been increased by more than $900, and the number of Pell Grant recipients has expanded by more than 3 million since 2008. The American Opportunity Tax Credit was also created to provide up to $2,500 of tax credits per year for 4 years of college tuition. To rein in costs, the administration's race to the top for college affordability and completion seeks to create incentives for states to maintain funding for higher education and pursue reforms that will lower prices. Even so, at the same time that our economy needs to be nourished and rejuvenated by people who've had a higher education, students are finding it increasingly difficult to finance their studies. Students often foot tuition bills themselves by working through school, drawing down savings, or taking on student debt. An estimated 60% of undergraduates who received 4-year degrees in 2012 finished with some student debt, as compared with 30% of graduates in 1993. These numbers also are affected by the type of school a student attends, whether it's a public community college, a private 4-year school, or a for-profit school. The vast majority of student loans today are financed by the federal government. At private and for-profit schools, greater percentages of students rely on federal student loans to finance their education than at public colleges. For example, during the 2011 to 2012 school year, 17% of students attending public two-year schools took out federal loans, compared with 61% of those attending two-year for-profit schools. In all, at the end of 2013, there were more than 40 million student loan recipients and approximately $1.1 trillion in debt outstanding associated with federal student loan programs. These numbers are daunting. But to what extent should we be concerned? Or more precisely, is there data and evidence suggesting that these numbers could create potential headwinds to our country's economic growth? What markers should we be paying attention to? As a steward of the federal government's finances and of the American economy, the Treasury Department has a strong interest in making sure we're asking the right questions when we consider the number of student loan borrowers, the amount of student loan debt outstanding, and how borrowers are faring with student loan debt over time. We must also bear in mind that many students borrow amounts that are reasonable given the enormous potential individual returns to higher education. As I noted earlier, student loans serve an important economic purpose, helping students invest in their potential through higher education and generating positive spillovers from each individual's education. As a society, we recognize that federal student loan programs provide millions of deserving, talented, ambitious students, like the students here, the ability to contribute to our economy. But we want to be clear-headed when we evaluate the sustainability of these debt levels and the challenges associated with repayment. To do this, we need to look carefully at the performance of these loans. For example, what portion of outstanding student borrowers are delinquent, meaning they've missed one or more payments? What portion of outstanding student loans are in default, which usually means the individual is 270 or more days late in making a payment and hasn't made any arrangements like deferment or forbearance to temporarily postpone the payments? How are delinquencies and defaults changing over time? In other words, what portion will not get repaid, and what consequences will a borrower face when the loan is not repaid? Given that people generally don't know at the time the loan is originated how much money they're going to make at the time they graduate and beyond, we have to make sure that there are appropriate options in place to help them manage their debt loads. So let's drill down a bit on these questions. So among those who borrowed, undergraduates who recently finished school have an average of approximately $30,000 in student loan debt. And the large majority of graduates who are able to make payments on this debt will spend 10 years or more paying it down. And they'll be juggling, high monthly payments while working, paying rent or a mortgage, raising children, and building a future. For other graduates, this burden is going to be too much to bear. Of borrowers who entered repayment in the 2010 fiscal year, 14.7% had defaulted by the end of the fiscal year 2012. And for those at for-profit schools, the number was even higher, at nearly 22%. While delinquency rates on many other types of debt have fallen in recent years, delinquencies on student loan debt are rising. Evaluating these levels depends in turn on understanding fully the consequences of delinquencies and defaults. So what are the costs associated with delinquent loans? For one, delinquent borrowers could have future problems accessing credit, which will affect the person's ability to buy a car or a first home. In some cases, delinquency can even affect a person's ability to participate fully in the economy, because many employers now run credit checks as part of their standard employment verification processes, and blemished credit may send a negative signal, causing an employer to think twice about hiring a delinquent borrower. Default carries even more serious costs and consequences. A recent report from the National Consumer Law Center noted that vulnerable students attempting to better their lives face severe consequences if they default on federal student loans. They can have their wages garnished and their credit marred for many years. Even borrowers who ultimately avoid default and repay their debt can face additional charges if they fall behind on their payments at some point. This can require further sacrifices to pay the monthly bills, which again will dampen consumption and hinder the economy's recovery. The sustainability of high levels of student loan debt needs to be analyzed against the backdrop of this more granular data. And to the extent that adverse costs and consequences associated with student loan indebtedness can be mitigated or eliminated, we should think carefully about how to do that. For example, we should be putting in place policies to help people make informed decisions about where to go and how to pay for school, and strengthen our efforts to inform and protect borrowers at every stage of the process. When it comes to helping students choose the right educational path, the administration has continuously pushed to centralize, standardize, and make accessible information that can help students make an effective comparison between schools. Through the Department of Education's College Scorecard, this information is now available in an interactive format that helps families weigh and make informed decisions about their options for higher education and about the financial responsibilities associated with these options. Additionally, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, in partnership with the Department of Education, has launched a Know Before You Owe campaign to make sure students have information on the true costs of financing a degree. With input from students, parents, guidance counselors, and college officials, the Department of Education and the CFPB have created a standardized financial aid shopping sheet that's now used by more than 200 colleges, 2,000 colleges and universities. The affordability of student loans as compared to returns from the investment in higher education is also relevant to understanding the sustainability of these high debt levels. So there's a lot to be said and researched on affordability. But let's also look at another piece of the student loan amount, and that is the effectiveness of servicing and collection efforts, which is also important in determining whether student loans are resulting in dangerously high levels of delinquencies or defaults. As a lender, that evaluation includes making sure the government's student loan servicers, and the servicers are the name that we give to banks or similar institutions who receive and process the borrower's monthly payments on the government's behalf, and we're talking about public loans here. We want to make sure that those servicers know immediately when a borrower is in trouble and can be ready to offer that borrower a repayment program that gives him or her the best chance of successfully repaying their loans. We have a world-class system of higher education in our country that's the envy of people living on every continent. Our system of financial aid and federal student lending should be world-class and world-famous as well. From the moment students sign the promissory note to the moment they make their final student loan payment, we must have the necessary programs in place to ensure they are able to successfully manage their loans. The federal student loan servicers are often the main touch point for borrowers once they leave school, and therefore are vital to improving the higher education financing system. All borrowers should be able to rely on a system in which the servicer, the university, and the government provide information and resources to help borrowers manage their loans successfully. This is critical to ensuring that taxpayers recoup their investment and that borrowers can make the most of their education without being sidetracked by the consequences of delinquency or default. With nearly $1.1 trillion of outstanding federal student loans, we have an obligation, we the government, to work across agencies with servicers and with schools to inform and protect borrowers' best interests. These tasks require that we have sufficient data and information to assist troubled borrowers. if we can understand the patterns that led to delinquency and that lead to default, we may be able to predict or even preempt such outcomes to the benefit of borrowers, taxpayers, and economic growth. By working with servicers and across government, we can measure and improve borrower outcomes in ways that assure our higher education system truly is the engine for continued economic mobility and economic growth. I will stop there. I want to thank you for allowing me again to be with you here today. I wish you all success in your future endeavors. And I'm confident that you, under the strong leadership of President Grabowski, will achieve great things and make an indelible mark on the world around you. Thank you.
So we're going to have an informal conversation now, and I will ask some questions. And I had a chance to talk to a number of students.
I'll let you turn that on.
Great. Okay, all right. Suzanne Mettler is a Cornell researcher who's just written a book that people have either read or they've seen something on TV about it. The title of the book is Degrees of Inequality. And she suggests that there are things we're doing right now in higher education that are, quite frankly, leading to a wider division between the haves and have-nots. And she suggests that the fact that Pell Grants no longer have the kind of impact they had 30 years ago, that at one point, literally 80% of tuition and fees, room and board could be covered through Pell Grant. Today it's about 30%. That people who have incomes between 100 and 180,000 have tax credits that can be helpful to them, that we don't know what to say about people who are not getting Pell Grants and who are not in that higher level income bracket. And the question she raises is, what should the federal government be doing to help people who are neither possibly eligible for Pell Grants and who are not in the $125,000, $200,000 range? What would you say?
So it's an excellent set of observations, and obviously one that we are well conscious of. I think part of the reason that Pell Grants, which actually have increased in number,
yes,
in the recent administration, the reason though why they can't, and in essence, be sufficient is because tuitions are rising so fast.
Yes.
And so I think part of the puzzle here is figuring out the best ways in which we can control the increase in college tuition. So that is one piece of it. Another piece of it, as I tried to allude to in my remarks, is that the student debt piece, I think we want to make sure is being engaged in by people who have full information, who understand options and can understand the best use, really, of these student loan payments in terms of the schools they go to, the returns they reach, the returns they're able to reach. And then the final piece of it also is the servicing piece and the collection of these student loans. And again, that is another very important factor that I think we have to look at, and that is going to really, if not done correctly, could exacerbate some of the observations that I'm imagining she's making in her book.
Sure. She talks about the declining support from states, for example, that as states have declined and reduced the amount given to public institutions, that institutions have increased the tuition. Maryland is fortunate that, quite frankly, it's been very different from that. They have worked to continue to support public higher education far more than many other states in the area. Do you see any change in that trend? The trend is for less and less money from states, quite frankly, and therefore more and more increases in the tuition required, more and more expected from American families. What would you say?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of factors involved. I think the states did retrench, or many states retrenched in terms of the sort of support that they gave their public institutions. A lot of that was in reaction to the crisis and the effect that the crisis had on the budgets of a lot of state and local governments. I'd like to think that as our economy rebounds, as we move into situations where many states are now being in a position where they're building up their surpluses again, that the priority of funding public universities and colleges will be one that the states will be able to continue to invest in. I think that is, one possibility, certainly.
So we talk about the different types of institutions people can attend, the different options, and I think it's fair to say that most Americans don't know much about the differences in costs, in graduation rates, in whether people get jobs between public and private, and the relationship between what they cost, particularly institution, and the salary of the family. And so, for example, the for-profits, we know, cost much more than publics. The for-profits, while representing well under 20% of the students in higher education, represent about a third of the $1 trillion in financial aid given out, and a significant proportion of the debt and the default rate right now, with about half of those students coming from minority families and another big portion from low-income families who were impressed by what they saw on TV about what can happen if you go to one of the for-profits. How do we go about making sure we have accurate information on each type of for-profit and other institutions as families make decisions about the best place for sons and daughters or for themselves?
It's an excellent point, and I think that one thing we have to do, and we have started doing it, we're going to have to continue to refine it, and that is, in essence, giving students a kind of scorecard. Students and their families, which would be a standardized scorecard, right? So that, in other words, it would be standardized across all schools, for-profit, not-for-profit, community colleges, all schools, with certain metrics that the school would have to report on. And I think then, with that kind of disclosure, that should help certainly students and their families start to compare schools, because I agree the amount of information is kind of at overload levels.
Yes.
The amount of advertising even can be quite extreme. Sure. And you feel bombarded as a student, and you have no idea as to whether it's worth paying, a certain amount more for a particular school because perhaps that school offers certain outcomes. So it's important to I think, have a standardized scorecard that will help in that regard.
And I suppose the question is, how do we go about identifying the data that will be most important as we think about using analytics to look at the trends for different types of institutions? Just one example.
Sure. I mean, I'd like to see some data on defaults and delinquencies.
Yes. You would assume that the people who are not paying the bill or the debt are often people who may not have gotten jobs. When you look at the percentage of students who, quite frankly, don't graduate from these institutions, they didn't have a job to begin with in many cases. They go to school, they end up tens of thousands of dollars of debt. They still don't have a job or the skills. There's no way they're going to pay it back. Is there a way right now that we know what's happening with those people who did not graduate in relationship to debt?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to have the data on that. I have a sense, anecdotally, that we have a growing number of students who cannot make it through 4 years of college for whatever reason.
Right.
Their families need them to work, or they can't continue to afford the education, and they are leaving. And oftentimes they leave without the benefit of a degree and with high levels of debt.
Yes.
And I'd like to see that data, and I'd like to see it, in an objective way, so that we could start to make sense of it and make sure that we're forming policies that respond to it.
Really sensitive question, if you're ready for this, right? There are very powerful lobbyists who will represent different kinds of institutions to protect them, and when we understand that, how do we go about getting beyond the power of lobbyists to make sure things remain the same when we see that there are trends that are leading to more and more people, particularly at the bottom end, not doing well? What can be done to put in perspective the truth, the data analysis versus what you hear based on powerful lobbying in Washington?
Yeah, so
Tough
it is tough, and it's and I try, not to be cynical. Coming to a place here, like talking to students, really,
helps you overcome any cynicism that you get inside the Beltway. But I tend to operate with the view that facts and objective analysis of facts are potent. They are
Yes.
potent, and that's what we have. That's what we should try to get, and I think we start there. And we use those facts. We use those facts to formulate policies that are going to be correct and going to be optimal. And so I tend to search for the facts and poke at them too, to make
Yes.
sure that if they're being espoused by a particular interested group, that we understand where'd you get those facts and how valid are they.
There are 50 million Americans who started college and never graduated. And when that's come out in different media sources, people will often say, I'm 35 years old, I'm 40 years old, I've forgotten everything, I know it's too late to go back. My response is, if you raise kids, you can do anything. You really can. You really can, right? You know much more than you think you know. How can we give support to working adults who would like to finish degrees so they can move up in ways that are more creative than what we're doing right now?
Yeah, but you're just brilliant to be, to note this group, because
Yeah.
I've thought about not only, a lot of the working mothers who do want to get back into finishing an education
Sure.
and have been, have been diverted. Think of the veterans. Think of a lot
Yeah.
of the people who are coming back from the wars, and they essentially want and have skills, relevant skills that could be assimilated into the workplace, and need a certain amount of education to kind of put them into the right, into the right occupation. And so there's a huge challenge here, and you're exactly right that it's really some unmet potential. And what I would do about it, I obviously don't have a silver bullet answer, but I think that one thing we want to think about are what obstacles these different groups face. So kind of figure out the different demographics, figure out what is keeping them now from continuing their education. Is it that they have, again, amassed large amounts of debt from a prior educational experience? Is it that they, in essence, have had some kind of default, or something that is actually hindering them from going back in? Is it possible that they don't understand what all their different options are? So I would analyze essentially the different obstacles that they could be facing, different groups, and then just roll up our sleeves and see what we can do collectively to start addressing them.
So final question involving financial literacy. As we listen to students today talking, many said that their parents were working class people, in some cases just had not been able to save enough money for them for college, and the students were talking about what they were doing to try to understand what it's going to take to make it. What would you envision happening in our country to increase the number of people who understand how to go about saving for college, how to go about paying back debt once you're out of college, how to be careful when you see those credit cards coming at you on college campuses, right? And how to understand the relationship between amount of money you're bringing in per month and the kind of institution and the cost of that institution as a reasonable one for your son or daughter.
Right. So financial literacy is just a constant challenge. And we certainly saw huge aspects of it, or the lack of it, or the shortfalls of it in the financial crisis, in the mortgage, in the mortgage arena. But I think now we're seeing aspects of it in college comparisons and the student loan decisions. So it's a multifaceted problem. It's one that isn't amenable to a single solution. I also always hasten to say when we talk about literacy that my view is that families really, for the most part, they want to be able to help their children go to college. They understand it as something that is going to better their families and the futures of their children. They want this, and it's not always for lack of trying, or for wastefulness, or some kind of just sort of bad character that they're not, in essence, in a position to afford. helping their children go to school. They want this. And I think we need to target our literacy efforts on people as we find them. And that's, I think, just a big challenge.
You know, just a comment about that. I'm convinced that in colleges, we across the country should be thinking about ways of helping young people understand what it means to be financially literate and how to prepare to live their lives. It's a real challenge. You have been someone who's been doing some wonderful work in public service on a personal level. How did you decide for my students to get into public service, and who made the difference in your life as you think about where you're going and where you are right now?
Oh, it's a fun question to answer. And to talk about. First of all, public service for me has been just one of the most honorable callings. I have felt very privileged in my life to have the opportunities where I could be in public service, and I have learned immense amounts from being able to serve in our country. And it's just, I recommend it to college graduates. I recommend it to people who've been in the private sector for years, and I have done work in the private sector as well. There's something about public service that gets you very jazzed up every morning, and just it's a very gratifying work. It's very hard work too. I mean, it's hard. That said, in terms of people who've inspired me, I have to say it was my education, really. Being in a set of classes with professors who taught critical thinking and wanted to view education as a way for not just personal betterment, but to make the public a better place, and being able to contribute to that. That's essentially what moved me.
Please join me in congratulating and welcoming again Secretary Raskin. Very, very nice. I'm going to take you out this way, okay?